Joined now by our Canucks reporter, Jeff Paterson of Rinkwide. He'll be back at it tomorrow with Chris Faber sitting in as the guest co-host. First time for Faber against the Florida Panthers. We'll talk about the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning last night. Jeff, how are you?
Doing well, guys.
So, what to do with Tyler Myers here? It is our Bodog poll question, and hey, give him a little credit. He scored one of the goals last night. But our Bodog poll question, what's the best course of action with Tyler Myers? Cut his ice time, healthy scratch, trade, or just leave him be? What says you, Jeff?
I think that you have to leave him be for the time being. I just don't think there's a trade market right now. We know that they tried through the summer. I think you got to get to the 20-game mark, and teams sort of have to figure out who they are and what they are, and maybe at that point some trade opportunities present themselves. But in the short term, he's not going anywhere. And so you could scratch him for a game. Like, I don't have an issue with that. The Canucks did that with Oliver Ekman-Larsson at a point last year where it just reached that point where even a veteran guy had to be sent a message. But you have to ask yourself, if you take Tyler Myers out of the lineup, are you prepared to go into NHL action with Noah Juulsen and Mark Friedman as two of your right side guys? And as poor as the decisions were by Tyler Myers against Tampa Bay, and it hasn't been a great start to the season for him, I get that. Look, he's 34. He's got almost 1,000 games of NHL experience. Juulsen and Friedman combined have about 100. It's not as simple as sit him down and get him out of there, because the options aren't all that palatable behind him. And again, it comes right back to the same discussion we've had really since the start of the season about that right side and about moving the pieces and the defense by committee and all those things. When you pair Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek, it just exposes weaknesses elsewhere in the lineup. And I don't think anybody really liked the idea of Tyler Myers in the top four for the Vancouver Canucks, but that's where he's been to start this season. And you're going to get nights, and you're going to get decisions, and you're going to get mistakes like you did in Tampa Bay.
So have we given up on the idea that one of these free agent lefties can flip over and play the right side, or you just think that continues to be a non-starter for Rick Tocchet, at least in the interim here?
Yeah, I mean, that conversation has died down a little bit, but it may have to be revisited. But it does seem like we know he wants the righty-lefty equality, and if that's the way he wants to approach these games, then he has, it gets pretty thin in terms of the choices that he's got over on that right side. So, when I say, to answer your poll question about what to do with Myers, I say you're going to have to live with him, but I would suggest that as a team, the Vancouver Canucks play better, spend less time in their own zone, more time in the attacking zone, draw some penalties so that they're on the power play. And guess what? All of a sudden, Tyler Myers isn't defending as much as he is right now, although easier said than done, because part of the reason that they're spending time in their own zone and not moving to the attack is because this defense core outside of Quinn Hughes, not transitioning pucks, getting pinned in their own zone. But I do think overall team play, they are playing with fire, just getting outshot as badly as they are. And if they could transition the puck and start to play in the other half of the ice, then that takes the workload off their goaltenders, but it also takes some of the heat off the guys that play defense for this hockey club.
His mistakes are so loud sometimes. It's hard to avoid Tyler Myers. I do wonder at some points if it's just a case of us concentrating on him so much. I think Lucas Spiza was a victim to this. So, like, we just watched every nuance of Lucas Spiza's play and picked it apart mercilessly. I think Myers is suffering from that a little bit, although he doesn't help himself when the mistakes are just so loud, Jeff. I mean, it's there is an element of sympathy to be had here, but at the same time, he doesn't help himself either.
Not only are the mistakes loud, but they put Elias Pettersson in peril physically.
There's that too, yes.
But you're right. Like, I mean, just the fact that he is a giant on skates, your eyes are drawn to him. And so there's nothing he can do about that. That's who he is. Those are the genes that he was born with. But ultimately, it comes down to processing this game at the speed at which the NHL game is played. And he's going to be 34 here. He's not going to improve in that facet. And so when I say you have to kind of live with them, you do have to be prepared that there are going to be questionable decisions with and without the puck. And we saw, two grand examples of that, with the puck on the first goal, the giveaway, and then without the puck as he goes and, joins the fray and ultimately pins Elias Pettersson on the penalty kill. And that allowed Tampa to outnumber the Canucks down low. So you'd like him just to somehow find a way to simplify and eliminate some of those massive mistakes. But the game is fast. It comes at you quickly. And that has been the issue in his time in Vancouver, certainly. And it probably predates his time in Vancouver. I didn't watch every game that he played for Winnipeg or Buffalo, but that's where he gets into trouble, is just try to process things. And if you're a beat late at the NHL level, the opponents are on you, then you're forced to make plays that you don't want to make. So when he had time and space, like he did on the penalty kill on that first goal, just like free reign to blast it as hard as he could 200 feet down the ice, eliminate any of the misfortune that he invited with the pass into traffic that ultimately a few minutes later winds up in the back of the net.
A Lucas Krychek flipper, for heaven's sakes. But I think that's where Tyler Myers, the 25-year-old, creeps into his head a little bit when he was a far more dynamic player. And I think he might still be thinking of himself in those terms when he used to make a spectacular pass, when he used to skate end to end and was getting half a point per game. That's just not him anymore. And I wonder if it's tough for him to think glass and out sometimes.
Longing for the days of youth, aren't we all?
Yes, exactly.
But you're right. I mean, there may be a little bit of that, hey, I used to be able to do this in my own mind. Unfortunately, the game is faster, way faster now than it was back then, even a few years ago. And so you're right. But I just think at this stage of his career, and I've asked you guys this before, this is the final year of his contract. We know that, the league is getting younger. Big guys do seem to get opportunities, but I'll be really curious to see if there's a contract for Tyler Myers after this one. We saw some really good players that had to go to camps on PTOs. Again, they don't make them like Tyler Myers, and so his size and his reach and everything else probably gets him one more contract. I don't think it'll be here in Vancouver, but I will be fascinated to see where it goes. And ultimately, a lot of that will be determined by the remaining 78 games of this Vancouver Canucks schedule. He has to be better. There can't be many more nights like that, because honestly, if you just look at the strip it all down to its basics, the Canucks scored 3 goals on the road and got that kind of goaltending from Thatcher Demco and skate out of Tampa with nothing. I think that effort and 3 goals on the road with that kind of goaltending would probably get a lot of games to overtime at the very least, so that they get something out of it. And unfortunately for them, they give up the 2 power play goals. Myers is central in both of them, and you just can't. You can't survive in the National Hockey League spotting your opponents 2 on the special teams, and that's ultimately what the Canucks did last night. And so, again, I had no issue with the effort. I know Rick Tocchet post game, he tried to play up the positives, but ultimately it is fine lines and margins at this level, and you make those kinds of mistakes that wind up in your net. It's going to be tough to overcome those.
Pettersson's tied for the league lead in scoring. He's also joined Hank and Danny as the only Canuck with 6 or more assists through the first 4 games of a season. And yet I saw you and others wondering yesterday, Jeff, whether he's 100% after taking that shot from Myers. A word or two about his performance, a word or two about what you think is going on physically with Elias.
Yeah, I don't think he's 100%. He had played 7.5 minutes at even strength through the first couple of periods. They were down in the third, so they leaned on him, and he played almost that much in the third period alone. And he winds up in on 2 of the 3 goals, the primary assist on the Myers goal and then the secondary assist on the JT Miller goal. But they score 3, and he picks up 2 more points. He's up to 8 through 4 games. How can you argue with 2 points per game? And yet anybody, and certainly our listeners and you guys, we've all watched him through his time in the NHL. He has burst onto the scene as a legitimate star in this league with such dynamic performances. That's what seems to be missing right now in his game. There isn't that PD magic that I refer to. There aren't 2 or 3 plays per game right now where you're just left shaking your head and the other team is also shaking its head. Where did he go? And I think the other way to look at it is he's picking up his points, but Andrei Kuzmenko has been remarkably quiet. Connor Garland has been remarkably quiet. He's not elevating the 2 guys that he's been playing with the most. And so if this isn't Elias Pettersson at 100%, we all look forward to the fact that he gets back to full health and the points are there for him. But I just think there's enough of a body of work to his game now to know when he's totally dialed in, and whether it was being felled by the Myers shot in Philadelphia, whether this is the lingering effects. Remember, he missed basically an entire week, the second week of the preseason. Was sick for that game out in Abbotsford. I don't know if he would have played there anyhow, but I don't know. I know he's been asked about the illness and he's kind of downplayed it. And nobody was talking about an illness on opening night. Well, they were for Demko, but he had 4 points on opening night and looked pretty good then. But he's just been a little bit quiet in terms of carrying these games. But the underlying numbers were terrific last night. His line spent most of its time in the offensive zone. So, I want to be careful here. I'm certainly not trying to cut him down at all. It's just that I think he's raised the bar so high for himself in this market and in this league now that when he's not at the top of his game, but it shouldn't be too long, I don't think, before he gets there.
And that's the good news. He clearly has to be close, given the underlying numbers, given the counting stats. I mean, he's in and around it, and it could be scary once he does find his groove. And
and the fact that they had just one power play last night and got shut out in Philadelphia. So, if this team starts to generate some points in the power play, you have to think he's going to be in the middle of that. And again, it's not point production, but boy, wouldn't that be something if maybe just to get the good vibes going with the man advantage, to spend more time in the attacking zone, with other good players and try to sort of find that feeling again, because I want the PD magic. I want to see those flashes again. Those seem to be missing from his game right now.
Yeah, and mentioned in the post game last night, we've got to stop getting out power played here. There's too many power plays against, not enough.
But they're not moving their feet enough to get the power play.
He wasn't most happy with the officiating yesterday either, but that's not the reason they lost.
Speaking of magic, the goaltender has it, and we've seen him in fine form before. The bubble, most notably, perhaps, but beyond that as well, I'm sure. So I'm not going to get too hyperbolic here and say that this is the best we've ever seen him, but this would probably be in the collection of the greatest weeks or fortnights of Demko's career. He just looks like he has got everything dialed in right now.
Yeah, and I think it has since, I try not to judge the work of goaltenders in training camp when it was essentially just practice drills, but through the preseason, I thought his appearances in the preseason, he looked sharp and focused, and he has certainly carried that in. Didn't make it out of opening night due to the illness, but is showing no ill effects there in the two starts since, and that's what's disappointing. As good as he's been, his win-loss record is 1-2. He deserves better, and you hope that he can just keep his game at that level and the rest of the guys in front of him can get their games to some sort of level like that. But yeah, the save that he makes on Stamkos before ultimately Nick Paul is able to shove home the rebound on the opening goal. Spectacular stuff. There have been a few jaw-dropping saves each and every night out for Thatcher Demco. So yeah, good sign for him, especially when you compare it to where he was at this time a year ago. He was scuffling. Obviously, the team was scuffling, and then he got hurt, and we know that the season essentially was flushed. So hopefully for him, he can stay healthy. He can keep his game at or near this level, because there's no doubt. He gives the Canucks, just based on track record, the Canucks should have had an edge in goal last night. And unfortunately for them, Demko performed to the point that I think he could have delivered a result. But again, you give up 4 and you only score 3. The math just doesn't add up in that regard. So yeah, he's been really good for them. I think we have to start looking at this hockey club, though, guys. Like, the further we get from opening night, hold it in your heart. It was fun. It was 8 goals, but they have 7 goals since then in 3 games.
Yeah.
So I think the real Canucks are standing up here a little bit, and obviously 8's going to be the outlier. They only got 8 once last year.
With a team save
said it the day after, a 7-goal win will probably be the biggest win of the season in game 1.
And their team save percentage on the season is like .932.
No, guys, Thatcher Demco, incredible. Elias Pettersson, elite, tied for the league lead in points. Talk it last night, called the JT Miller line dominant, and they have been.
Yeah.
It's the same old
right.
with this group. It's the bottom 6 outage. It's not good enough on defense. Speaking of forwards, Beauvillier, and I saw you wrote about him the other day, Garland, Kuzmenko. Who are you most worried about right now?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Kuzmenko. I think it'll come for him, but he had a really strange night last night in Tampa where he was the Corsi darling. His individual Corsi was 80%. I think the shot attempts were 16-4 with Kuzmenko on the ice at even strength. And he had the Louis Eriksson. He had the completely blank stat line. So how does that mesh with spending that much time in the offensive zone and not putting a single puck to the net? Now, we know he's not a volume shooter, but still, that seems strange to me that he didn't have any sort of significant impact on the stat sheet. Forget about the scoreboard, but, a goal and 2 points through 4 games now for him. I want to see him dangerous. I want to see him put in positions to shoot the puck. So, it has been a little bit of a quiet start. I think a lot of people thought there'd be some regression there, and maybe this is an indication of that. Again, I think Elias Pettersson at even strength, he'll get to a point where he does elevate whoever he's playing with. Connor Garland doesn't seem like a fit on that line. Boy, have you ever heard that before? Unfortunately, and I know that there's so much noise around him, but it is the square peg in the round hole wherever he plays up and down this lineup. There just doesn't seem to be things happening for him and around him. And Beauvillier's been disappointing. I thought he was better last night. I think the coach thought he was better. He was asked about him post-game. He seemed a little more invested last night. Now, this is an NHLer getting paid $4 million plus. He damn well better be invested almost every night, but he had a really quiet preseason, and the first 3 games of the year, there just was nothing there at Anthony Beauvillier's game. So better last night, hopefully a step in the right direction for him. But Tocchet was asked post-game about, is that enough from guys like Beauvillier and Joshua that you notice them and that they're digging in a little bit? And the coach said, to a point, but at some point as well, on those nights where Brock Besser's not scoring his 5 goals in 4 games and other guys are held quiet. Why did they beat the Oilers on Saturday? Because depth guys rose up. Now, they're not going to rise up every night, but Anthony Beauvillier is somewhere between a depth guy on this team and somebody that you would expect to produce at a certain level. It's just been a really, really quiet start for him as he's kind of stumbled out of the blocks here. So I guess of the 3 that you mentioned, I still need to see more from Anthony Beauvillier.
And I thought I was telling the Tocchet began praising Beauvillier and then quickly shifted to Dakota Joshua and ultimately said, look, it's one thing for that line to saw off the opposition. At some point, you need some production. Last question from me.
Outside and he called him Joshua Dakota again.
I know, but he admonished himself, Jeff. He said, I got to get that right.
Just stick with Dakota then. Just
exactly.
eliminate one of the names. Simplify. We're talking about Tyler Myers simplifying. The coach should simplify as well. Just call him Dakota.
Benning, how many mispronunciations for how many years with guys who had been with them 3 or 4 years? So,
but that one is so clearly in his head.
I know. He shook. Outside of getting beaten up and really taking a nasty, gratuitous punch to the back of the head at the end of that fight, what did you make of Mark Friedman's first NHL game or first Canucks game?
Yeah, it's funny to me, and we discussed him on Rink Wide, but very much the eye test versus the underlying numbers. The underlying numbers were brutal. The Canucks were outshot 8-0 in 15 minutes of even strength ice time with Friedman on the ice, and yet I never felt like it was a carnival in his own zone. I didn't feel that the Canucks were completely under siege and underwater, and I thought it was relatively quiet. So he was on the ice for the Esamont goal and probably gave Esamont a little too much space as he raced down that left side. That was a good shot, and I'm sure Demko would like to think that he makes that save on a lot of occasions. But, for a guy that got dealt, had to drive across the state to join the team in Philly, to fly to Tampa, gets 1 practice, and then gets thrown in against a Lightning team that has the championship chops, that's a tough assignment for anybody. So I want to be careful, and I want to cut him a little bit of slack with the extenuating circumstances. I just know that there can't be a lot of nights where the team's getting outshot 8-0 when he's on the ice in limited minutes. But, where Noah Juulsen was caught pinching and, the penalty shot goal in Philadelphia, I didn't think that his decision-making hurt him in any way. And so I think there is some promise there. And trying to get in the good books with his coaching staff and teammates, dropping the gloves. Tanner Jeannot is a tough customer, we know. Gave up some size there. Came out on the short end, but, the old size of the dog thing, he'll get some marks as he tries to make his way into this lineup and stay in this lineup. So, I'd like to see him again, I guess, just, as things sort of settle down around him and he settles in. It's a day off for the team in Fort Lauderdale, so no practice. So that's not going to make life a whole lot easier for Mark Friedman because he could probably benefit from a few practices here, having not played in the NHL before the trade this year. So, he was chasing the game a little bit, but I think there were some signs there. And I thought as the game went along, he got a little bit better, maybe just kind of caught up to the speed of the game. So,
see, I wouldn't like to see him again, Jeff. I'd like to see an NHL defenseman there bumping Tyler Myers down to the third pair.
Yeah.
And
understandable.
I mean, and again, nothing personal on Friedman. I just think,
well, even Alvin called him a 7th defenseman.
Right. These are replacement level defensemen, and they're leaning on these guys.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
Got to get better there.
Yeah.
Jeff, marvelous stuff. Thank you for this. We'll be listening with Faber tomorrow, rink wide, after the Panthers and Canucks. We'll catch up with you on this show on Monday.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
This great clip brought to you by, wait for it, Great Clips. It's going to be great.